Welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will France, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you train a little better and just have more fun out on the trails. So if you enjoy this, please share it with somebody or subscribe or like or anything that you've heard the spiel. You get it. Today, let's talk about food. It's been a while since I've done some nutrition related episode. And there's good reason for that because it talking about nutrition often kind of pisses me off because it is an exhausting conversation a lot of the time, not due to anybody with whom I'm speaking. It is due to the amount of bullshit on the internet. And there are just so many charlatans on the internet. And it can be very tough to know who to follow. And nutrition is one of the things that gets me the most pissed off on the internet because it can like poor information in nutrition sphere leads to often or can lead to eating disorders. And eating disorders kill people a lot. If we look at some basic stats, most of this episode is going to be a little more off the cuff, but I did look up some stats just to make sure I wasn't over exaggerating. So like 10%, 9% of the US population, about almost 30 million Americans will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. Anorexia has either the highest or second highest mortality rate of any mental illness, depending on how you want to rank it. 10,000 deaths a year are a direct result of an eating disorder. That is a death less than every hour, every 52 minutes. And eating disorder sufferers are 11 times more likely to attempt suicide than people without eating disorders, and patients with anorexia are at an 18-time higher risk. So I really care when people provide shitty information about food on the internet because it's harmful. And it's deeply harmful if we're going to compare it to, like, running form. So while injuries are unpleasant and I get frustrated about poor strength training or running information, food is worse. So when looking at nutrition information on the internet, who should we believe? And it is honestly tough because I would love to tell you to just follow a registered dietitian. And if you're interested, I do have a few names of people that I think are great and are really trustworthy. But we have also seen multiple people leverage their title and position for money over honesty. And as a result, things are difficult when we look at I don't know, it's difficult to figure it out. So a couple guidelines. One, in America, the US, nutritionist is not a legally protected term, meaning that it doesn't mean anything. It's like natural on a food label. So it is, if someone in the US is using nutritionist to describe themselves, I tend to be slightly concerned and discount them because it doesn't mean anything and it's just usually a fancy word that makes them sound more credible than they are. For me, I'm very explicit. I'm a nutrition coach. I've learned a lot about nutrition. I can do the coaching thing. I'm not a registered dietitian, and I don't call myself a nutritionist because it doesn't mean anything. Now, that is not true outside of the US because we like to make things super complicated. Some countries, nutritionist is a like legally protected term. So you might have to look into like watch one of their videos and see if they have an accent or if they live outside of the country. And if that's the case, then they might not be full of shit. But in the US, a lot of the time when we have someone who uses the term nutritionist, they are using it to make their status sound higher than it actually is. And I don't like that. So you do what you want. You're an adult. When we do look at things like registered dietitian, RD, these things are more likely to give you decent information. Doctor, is also, not a bad target, but we have people like Jason Fung, a nephrologist, giving incredibly harmful nutrition advice a lot of the time. So, uh, it is tough to do the research. A couple people I really like are one is Meredith Terranova. She has been on Jason Koop's podcast. She has been on Aaron Saff's podcast. I've heard her. She has a very reasonable perspective on nutrition. Um, I like Lane Norton. He's a little abrasive, but at least he's honest and will provide science-backed data. I like Alan Aragon. He is also very good, provides a ton of science-backed data. He's very much in line with Lane Norton, except less aggressive. And and if we look a little more in the running sphere, there's a lot of RDs who work specifically with runners who are just escaping me right now, and I'm not going to take the time to look them up. If you want recommendations for someone who's a dietitian, please just shoot me a message and I'll send them to you. I have like a list somewhere else on my phone. Um, so let's get into a few food requirements. We as runners often act like we have such different nutrition requirements than others, and or we just don't realize there's a difference at all. Like we're either on one end of the spectrum or the other, and we don't. Like we are still people. We're still a human organism who's trying to like move throughout our life, so the basics tend to be pretty close. The standard American like diet advice in heavy quotes is usually not applicable to us as athletes because most Americans looking for diet advice are looking to lose weight or lose body fat or, pardon me, become smaller. And that isn't great when we're looking at athletic performance because if we're trying to become smaller, then we're going to be in a calorie deficit. And as a result, we're going to limit our performance and increase our risk of injury, right? So this is where we end up with a misalignment. But otherwise, pretty close. Like we still need to get in the basics so that we don't get hurt, so that we can survive, so that our body functions well. Like it's not this massive disparity. And I think this is where the frustration, or I get frustrated when talking about nutrition with a lot of people, because I think on one end, we we see basic advice and we can know like maybe we follow it. That's not great because that's usually going to lead to being in a calorie deficit and getting hurt. So there's been this big pendulum response to the other side of things where we almost say like eat whatever you want to eat in like nothing but pizza and burgers because it'll guarantee that you're going to get your calories in. Vegetables aren't important. You don't need to eat fruit. Micronutrients don't matter. Just eat a ton of calories, which is the same advice but backwards. And I feel like if we just take a middle ground where we admit that maybe an apple occasionally is a good idea while still doing the arguably difficult work of eating enough food is important. Like we're trying to do tough things as athletes, and feeding ourselves should not be rocket science. It is probably going to be a little difficult because we're going to have to eat more than we may want to or maybe used to, or we're going to have to play with hunger signals a little bit here and there because a lot of the time if we go for long runs and we're not going to be hungry afterwards, we're going to need to like not necessarily force feed ourselves, but maybe eat some liquid calories or something that we wouldn't usually do. But it isn't this magical separation between general like general non-runner population to people who run, marathons and above. It's the same idea. We still need protein, we still need fiber, we still need to eat food. Whole foods still matter, micronutrients still matter. You need to get vitamins and minerals. Like all of these things are still important. And then you also need to eat some more and fuel your runs, because if not, we're probably going to get hurt. All right, so let's look at some of those standards and accept that maybe we still need to eat an apple, while also accepting that because you ran 30 miles in a day, that a burger is not going to kill you, right? So first, let's look at protein, because this is a thing we really need, and it is the thing that I see honestly across my clientele, from runners to 80-year-olds like trying to get back from osteoporosis. This is the thing that I see most often low, but we can still look at it. So there's still other things that tend to be a problem, but let's look at protein first. So protein, how much? Depends whether you want to track or not. If you really want to change your food and you're really curious about your food, tracking your food with an app, as long as it's not going to like spur some weird stuff for you, is really helpful. It shows you what you're eating. It shows you pretty much exactly why things are going wrong. It can give you a really good insight into what's going on. And if we use an app like Chronometer, then you can also see your like micronutrients. I'm not a huge fan of MyFitnessPal. I think it kind of sucks. Chronometer's free and it still lets you scan barcodes and still like it gives you a full micronutrient breakdown. So why not that one? So Chronometer, if we're going to do that, um, and we're looking for fairly wide range, zero point 0.6 to 1 gram per pound of body weight when it comes to protein. And this is for lean body weight. So if you're fairly lean, like then good deal. Just use your body weight. Now, there's such a wide range because the lower end is really relevant when we are in caloric maintenance. So if we're maintaining weight or maybe even slightly increasing weight, then we can be on that lower end and not see any loss to muscle mass because fat and carbohydrates are protein sparing, meaning that if we're eating more calories, we lose less protein overall, and we don't need to replenish quite as much of it from our diet. So if we're not trying to lose weight and we're not losing weight, then we can get away with this lower end on the protein spectrum because fat and carbohydrates, meaning are protein sparing in our body. However, if we are in a fat loss, and this is why you'll see across the internet like zero point 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight here. And that is largely because we are constantly talking about fat loss because that is the only goal that ever seems to matter in the fitness industry, which is a whole different point that makes me very tired. But if we're going to look at protein, it can be anywhere from like 0 0.6 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. We can technically go higher. If you go higher as a runner, you're probably going to be unhappy because we're not going to get enough actual fuel in. But that's neither here nor there. If we were going to look at what that might mean from a non-gram perspective, then look at your hand, take the like size of your palm, and let's aim for like 4 to 5 of those a day, and probably spread out a little bit throughout your day is better. Um, doesn't make a huge difference. It'll be easier unless you just have a bottomless pit for a stomach like I tend to. But I do recommend you spread them out a little bit throughout your day. It'll probably be a little more effective and you won't feel quite as full. So 4 to 5 palm sized or 0 0.6 to 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein. And next, we are going to look at fat. So fat is, we need enough to support your hormones, and you need enough to support regeneration of like brain cells and cell walls and all of these things. If you don't have that, then your body will fall apart. And we saw this a lot in the 80s and 90s where there was like incredibly low fat diets as the diet trend, and everybody just felt like shit because it's not healthy for you. So if we have some fat, it improves performance. It will make eating easier because it tastes good. It increases satiety, so you still like you just feel more content. Like this is one of the things on the trail. There's no real benefit to consuming fat from a performance perspective on a run because the whole idea of the like fat adaptation thing was that you'd start using your own body fat because we have like probably a month of body fat for fuel. So you don't need to consume fat, but you'll probably feel a little better if you do, if you're out there for a day plus, right? If we're doing hundreds or 200s, then you probably want to eat something other than liquid carbohydrates. So that can be helpful because it'll just make your stomach feel a little happier. Um, it also reduces the risk of undereating because it's incredibly calorically dense, which is why they cut it so much in the 80s and 90s, trying to go for like hyper weight loss because it has a lot of calories in it and it's just helpful, right? So if we're going to look at fat, if you are tracking your calories, it needs to be a minimum. And I say minimum because it can be quite a lot higher of 25% of your overall calories. So if we're in some level caloric, whatever our caloric intake is, say I am consuming 2,000 calories, which I'm not, it just makes the math incredibly easy. Say I'm consuming 2,000 calories a day, and 500 calories should be coming from fat, right? And if I'm consuming 3,000, it'll be more than that, which is closer to what's accurate. So if we're looking at fat intake, it should be 25% of overall calories. If you're not tracking, um, your thumb, like this first digit, the bendy one on your thumb, probably 4 to 5 of those, just like liberally fat your food. I think the big thing here is it's really actually hard to undereat fat if you aren't intentionally removing foods that are high in or like moderately acceptable in fat. If you are an omnivore and you eat meat, then you are almost certainly going to hit your fat unless you constantly buy the like 97.3 lean to fat ratio meat. So don't do that. Buy the like 93% or 88%, and you'll be fine. You'll get plenty of fat. If you're vegan, then I'm not bashing the vegan diet, but the protein and fat requirements can be a little harder because you've just reduced your limitations. It's not pretend that thing when we remove options from the pale that it becomes a little more difficult. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It does mean you are very likely going to want to have a protein supplement as an option. You might not need it every day, but the vegans I have coached, and I have coached many, almost always rely on some level of protein supplementation in order to hit their target. Because at least a few days out of the week, not hitting that. And this is one of those targets where it doesn't really matter about activity during the day. We still want to hit a pretty consistent protein target day to day to day. Now, fat can be a lot easier as a vegan. You just eat some nuts and you'll be fine. Nuts are a really healthy form of fat, and so eat some. They're great. Now, carbs, if we're going to look at these carbohydrates, they are really good for performance. And technically, you don't need them, as the internet will tell you so much. If you spend too much time listening to diet advice on the internet, it is true. They're unnecessary for you to be alive, but they're not unnecessary for you to perform well and probably be a happier human because they make activity a lot easier. They improve performance. They increase satiety because they're usually fairly large if we eat them in a somewhat whole foods fashion. They will reduce the risk of undereating on the other hand because sugar is really helpful when you run, and they can also help drop cortisol at night, right? So like you don't need carbs, you don't need anything, but unless you really love eating a ketogenic diet, I mean, you do need protein and fat, as I've just said anyway. But unless you really love eating a ketogenic diet, or have a really good reason to do so, like epilepsy. That's what the ketogenic diet is originally for. I don't know why the hell you wouldn't eat carbs. They taste good. They help you perform better. Nothing wrong with them. Most of the time we demonize them, be it from a like fat loss perspective, because they are fairly calorically dense. But when we're demonizing these things, it's always like cake and potato chips, which calorically are more fat than they are carbohydrate anyway. So if we just take this middle ground approach and eat a bagel occasionally, you're going to be fine. And if we look at sugar, there's always this conversation about sugar, and I'm happy to have this on an individual basis. But sugar is not evil. We've shown this repeatedly over and over and over and over again. And there's still people on the internet like Robert Lustig pushing this now multiple times debunked idea that sugar is inherently bad for you, and it's not. We've shown this repeatedly that if we take it isocalorically and if we take it from if you match calories and you match protein across people, the intake of sugar doesn't matter. It just is really easy to overconsume. Now, there might be some mechanisms to where we probably shouldn't drink a ton of sugar if we're sedentary humans. But again, most of that comes from the fact that like a Coke, has, I don't know, 30, 40 grams of sugar in it, which also means it has like 150 calories in it. And if we're drinking four of those and not doing any activity, then that's going to cause some problems. It is not us as a training, running population. We should fuel things because it will make us perform better. It greatly reduces the risk of injury and it expedites your recovery time. And these are just true. And it doesn't need to be direct sugar if you have reasons to avoid it for other than the scaremongering on the internet. But carbohydrates are helpful. And there's no difference from a like actual perspective between a banana and like scratch super fuel and the bag of sugar I have in my pantry. All of those things process into the exact same stuff in your body. So whatever works for you, it allows you to fuel your runs and recover and stay safe is what you should do. And anybody who tells you not to is lying to you. Now, we should probably have a short conversation about diabetes. If you have diabetes, then don't follow my advice. Talk to a dietitian. That's their job, right? I will say that we have shown from, well, I've seen it from CGM data, from a continuous glucose monitor data from a couple of my clients who were working with a dietitian, and there's been studies on this, but sugar taken during exercise for people with like glycemic control issues is less problematic. And you will also see some people, like the guy I worked with, he had I've worked with someone with reactive hypoglycemia. So, like when he would consume too much sugar, his glucose would spike and then just plummet to the floor. And as a result, he's almost passed out a few times. And that makes it very hard to drive home after you've done a run. So he like cut it out completely and his blood sugar got his blood sugar super stable. And then we started testing it a little more. And he still had that reaction during daily life, but during activity, blood sugar super stable because he was using it, right? And this is not advice. Again, talk to a dietitian and like learn what works for you. But we see a much lower response during activity from sugar because your muscles are using the sugar. That's the whole point of taking it in, right? So we don't see that big pop because your body is making use of the substance that you're taking in, right? So diabetes is a thing where you should not get your medical advice from a podcast, but it can be some hope to where taking it in might be worth experimenting. It might be a good thing for you to try under the supervision of a medical professional, right? So finally, fiber. I think this is the one that often gets lost in this conversation amongst athletic people on the internet because there was so much nonsense for so long with people telling athletes to undereat. Just read Kara Goucher's book. Like it was terrible. And as a result, we've swung very much the other direction of just fuel, just eat enough, which is my basic advice. Just eat enough. And if you have any question about how much that is, try a little more and see what happens. I think you're going to be much better. You'll be much happier as a human and you're going to perform better and you'll recover better if you are a little overfed than underfed. And if you see rapid fat gain, then you can just eat a little less on a regular basis. But when we look at the things that tend to be lost here, it is usually fiber because in the just eat enough effort, we push things like burgers and pizza and French fries because they're super calorically dense, which I'm not demonizing those things. I have them on a fairly regular basis, some version of those things on a fairly regular basis. However, we also need to eat some vegetables. Like they're good for you. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing such a big uptick in, greens powders and micronutrient, like whatever, vitamins and minerals and all these things, and seeing such a benefit from them is because a lot of people just don't eat a salad. And I think if we have some fruit and some vegetables on a daily basis, like those things are still good for you. Those things are still good things to eat. It doesn't mean your entire diet needs to be comprised of them, but it probably means that we should have some fruits and vegetables, at least one or the other, at every meal. We should be having a few meals throughout the day. We should target protein. Make sure you're getting enough fat. If you're not directly trying to restrict it, you're probably going to be okay. And then eat a bunch of carbs because they are good for you and support performance. And you're really active, so it'll be fine. All right. And some of the struggles here is going to be is going to just come down to time. With the amount that you're training, and you probably have a job and kids or whatever your life responsibilities are, it can be really difficult to take enough time to eat the food you need to eat. Like today, I'm going to finish recording this and then pretty immediately sprint to work. So I have made some oatmeal and that's sitting in my fridge. I'm going to grab that and some yogurt and get out the door. So it is a tough thing to, you will have to do some planning in order to eat enough as an athlete. A lot of people have to do some planning in order to eat, in ways they want to eat anyway, because a lot of it, when we leave it for the last minute, that's where we end up making choices we don't want to make, be it in the weight loss sphere, we end up eating nothing but pizza and burritos. And in the athletic performance sphere, we forget to eat enough, so we end up injured. So it's just going to take a little bit of pre-planning. Doesn't need to take a ton of work. We're just looking for it, right? So I hope this was helpful. I realize there were no like hard specific answers in here, but that's really the whole point. We overcomplicate nutrition in a way that I find really harmful. And this constant effort to leverage something or some supplement or just lie to people on the internet to make some whatever menial amount of money. And I mean, to be fair, some of these people are not making menial amounts of money. They're making millions of dollars a year lying to people. But whatever amount of money it is, I wouldn't feel comfortable making anything if it leads to the like eating disorders and death of multiple people, right? I think it's deeply inappropriate, and that is what's happening right now. So let's take a step back and just eat a varied diet like we have for millennia. Like eat some protein, eat a wide range of colorful vegetables and fruits, eat enough, eat during your runs, eat before your runs, support yourself. And it's all we're looking to do. I have been waiting to put this out because I put a like meal guide together, and that will be in the show notes, or I'm gonna like repost it in the Facebook group because it was greatly in need of updating. So if you would like that, great. Click the link and do the thing. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Go have fun training and eat some food.